2016 Cleveland Indians. Cleveland held a 3-1 series lead over the Chicago Cubs and were 5 outs away from ending their 68-year championship drought in Game 7. Leading 6-3 in the 8th at home, manager Terry Francona pulled starter Corey Kluber after a leadoff single. The bullpen imploded. Andrew Miller, usually dominant, allowed 2 runs. Brian Shaw surrendered a game-tying RBI single to Ben Zobrist with 2 outs. The Indians managed just 1 hit after the 6th inning, squandering multiple scoring opportunities. Their offense, which had dominated earlier in the series, vanished. In the 10th inning, after a 17-minute rain delay that seemed to shift all momentum to Chicago, the Cubs scored twice. The Indians loaded the bases with 1 out in the bottom of the 10th, but could only muster a single run on a wild pitch. Michael Martinez, hitting .091 in limited postseason at-bats, represented the final hope and grounded out weakly to third base. Cleveland became the first team since the 1985 Cardinals to blow a 3-1 World Series lead, extending their championship drought to 68 years and counting. 1986 Boston Red Sox. The Red Sox were 1 strike away from their first championship since 1918 in Game 6 at Shea Stadium, leading 5-3 in the 10th. The curse of the Bambino seemed ready to end. Then everything collapsed in the most infamous sequence in baseball history. After 2 quick outs, Gary Carter, Kevin Mitchell, and Ray Knight singled consecutively to make it 5-4. Bob Stanley threw a wild pitch that tied the game, and Mookie Wilson's slow grounder rolled through Bill Buckner's legs at first base, allowing Knight to score the winning run. Buckner, playing on bad ankles that required pain-killing injections before each game, had been left in for defensive purposes despite his limited mobility. The Red Sox still had Game 7 to recover, leading 3-0 after 2 innings. They collapsed again. Boston's pitching surrendered 8 runs, including a 3-run homer by Knight. The offense managed just 5 hits after the 2nd inning. Bruce Hurst, who had dominated in Games 1 and 5, lasted only 2 2/3 innings in relief. The Red Sox scored 3 runs in 9 innings against Ron Darling and the Mets bullpen. Manager John McNamara's decision-making became indefensible, and Boston's generational failure extended the championship drought another 18 years. 2011 Texas Rangers. The Rangers were 1 strike away from winning their first championship twice in Game 6 at home and blew both opportunities. Leading 7-5 in the 9th with 2 outs and nobody on base, closer Neville Feliz was 1 strike away when David Freese tripled, tying the game. The Rangers scored twice in the 10th inning to take a 9-7 lead. Again, they were 1 strike away with 2 outs. Again, Freese came through with a 2-run single to tie it 9-9. In the 11th inning, Freese hit a walk-off home run. The Rangers had leads of 7-4, 7-5, 9-7, and lost them all in 3 innings. Game 7 wasn't even competitive. Texas managed just 2 runs against Chris Carpenter, while St. Louis cruised to a 6-2 victory. The Rangers' bullpen, which had been dominant throughout the playoffs, allowed 7 runs in the final 4 innings of Game 6. Manager Ron Washington's pitching decisions became increasingly desperate and ineffective as the game progressed. Texas had home field advantage and couldn't close out a championship that was literally 1 strike away on 2 separate occasions. 2024 New York Yankees. The Yankees held a 5-0 lead in Game 5 at Yankee Stadium, with Garrett Cole pitching a masterpiece and needed just 12 more outs to force Game 6 in LA. The 5th inning became a Little League defensive breakdown of historic proportions. Aaron Judge, who had been nearly invisible throughout the series, dropped an easy fly ball in center. Anthony Volpe bobbled a simple grounder at shortstop. Cole failed to cover first base on a routine grounder. 5 unearned runs scored as the Dodgers batted around without hitting a single ball particularly hard. Their offense, which had scored 5 early runs against Jack Flaherty, managed just 1 hit over the final 4 innings against the Dodgers bullpen. Judge finished the series hitting .184 with 1 RBI, completely disappearing when it mattered most. Giancarlo Stanton was the only offensive threat. The Yankees, with baseball's 2nd highest payroll, suffered one of the most humiliating defensive collapses in championship history, blowing a 5-run lead in an elimination game at home. 1985 St. Louis Cardinals. The Cardinals held a 3-2 series lead and were 1 out away from winning the championship in Game 6 at Kansas City. Todd Worrell, who had been nearly unhittable all postseason, got 2 quick outs in the 9th. Then Jorge Orta hit a routine grounder to first base that Jack Clark fielded cleanly and tossed to Worrell covering the bag. Umpire Don Denkinger called Orta safe despite clear photographic evidence showing he was out by half a step. The blown call should have ended the game with St. Louis winning the championship. Instead, the Cardinals completely unraveled. Clark misplayed a foul pop-up that would have been the 3rd out. Jim Sundberg singled, Hal McRae singled. Dane York delivered a 2-run single to win the game for Kansas City. The Cardinals had multiple chances to escape the inning and couldn't execute. Game 7 was a complete disaster. St. Louis allowed 11 runs in a humiliating 11-0 blowout. Pitcher Joaquin Andujar was ejected for arguing in a game that was already over. Manager Whitey Herzog was also tossed. The Cardinals scored 1 run in the final 18 innings of the World Series after leading the series 3-2. 2019 Houston Astros. The Astros had home field advantage and a lineup that led baseball in every major regular season offensive category. But they scored just 8 runs in 4 home games at Minute Maid Park, where they had been nearly unbeatable all year and became the first team ever to lose every home game in a World Series. The Astros offense hit 179 during the World Series, with star hitters Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, and Carlos Correa combining to go 9 for 63. Their pitching staff, which had been dominant, allowed 6 runs in Game 7 at home. The Astros stranded 11 runners on base in that elimination game, failing repeatedly with runners in scoring position. Houston's sign-stealing scandal, which was later exposed in 2020, made this loss particularly karmic. They cheated extensively during their 2017 championship season, and when they couldn't steal signs electronically in 2019, their offense completely disappeared at home. 1997 Cleveland Indians. The Indians were 3 outs away in Game 7 from winning their first championship since 1948. Leading 2-1 in the 9th inning with closer Jose Mesa on the mound, Cleveland seemed destined to finally end their drought. Mesa, who had converted 45 of 49 save opportunities during the regular season, immediately ran into trouble. Moises Alou led off with a single and advanced to third with 1 out after Charles Johnson's single. Craig Counsell then hit a deep sacrifice fly, bringing Alou home to tie the game 2-2. In the 11th inning, with runners on first and third and 2 outs, the Marlins' Edgar Renteria delivered a walk-off single up the middle past pitcher Charles Nagy that scored Counsell with the championship-winning run. The Indians' offense managed just 4 hits after the 3rd inning against Marlins pitching. Manager Mike Hargrove's decision to stick with Mesa, despite his struggles, became indefensible. Cleveland had dominated the American League all season with 86 wins and a loaded lineup, featuring Manny Ramirez, Jim Thome, and David Justice. They lost to a wild-card team with less history than most players' careers. The Indians would not return to the World Series for 19 years, and when they did, they blew another 3-1 lead. 1975 Boston Red Sox. The Red Sox pushed the Reds to 7 games and held a 3-0 lead in Game 7 at Fenway Park through 3 innings. Boston's offense, which had scored 30 runs in the first 6 games, completely vanished. They managed just 2 hits and 0 runs over the final 6 innings against a Reds pitching staff they had tormented throughout the series. Tony Perez hit a 2-run homer in the 6th off starter Bill Lee to make it 3-2. Pete Rose singled in the 7th, scoring on a Tony Perez single to tie the game 3-3. The deadlock lasted until the 9th inning when Ken Griffey led off with a walk and reached third on a sacrifice bunt and a groundout. After an intentional walk to Pete Rose, Joe Morgan knocked a clutch single up the middle for the winning run. Boston couldn't score more than 3 runs in the decisive game. Manager Darryl Johnson's pitching decisions became increasingly questionable as the game progressed, particularly his continued reliance on Lee despite clear signs of fatigue. The Red Sox offense, featuring stars Fred Lynn, Dwight Evans, and Carlton Fisk, couldn't deliver. Cincinnati proved too powerful, but Boston gave them the opening by failing to score with runners in scoring position multiple times. The Red Sox would wait another 11 years for their next World Series appearance, extending their championship drought through more heartbreak. 1988 Oakland Athletics. The Athletics steamrolled through the American League with 104 wins, sweeping the Red Sox in the ALCS and entering the World Series as overwhelming favorites against a Dodgers team that had barely made the playoffs. Oakland's lineup featured Jose Canseco, Mark McGwire, Dave Henderson, and Carney Lansford. Their pitching staff led baseball in ERA. They were supposed to dominate. Instead, Kirk Gibson, playing on 2 injured legs and unable to start Game 1, hit the most iconic home run in World Series history off closer Dennis Eckersley in the bottom of the 9th inning. The Athletics never recovered psychologically. They scored just 11 runs in 5 games despite their powerful offense. Canseco and McGwire combined to go 2 for 36 with 1 RBI in the series. Oakland's pitching staff, which had been dominant all year, allowed Dodgers hitters to hit .260 despite Los Angeles missing Gibson for most of the series. Orel Hershiser completely shut down Oakland's offense in Games 2 and 5, pitching 18 innings and allowing just 2 runs. The Athletics looked completely overmatched despite being heavily favored. Manager Tony La Russa couldn't find answers as his team sleepwalked through the series. Oakland became one of the biggest World Series favorites ever to get embarrassed. 2002 San Francisco Giants. The Giants were 8 outs away in Game 6 from winning their first championship since moving to San Francisco in 1958. Starter Russ Ortiz cruised through 6 innings, and when manager Dusty Baker removed him after getting the first out of the 7th with a 5-0 lead, he handed Ortiz the game ball as a souvenir. Troy Gloss and Brad Fulmer then singled off Felix Rodriguez, and Scott Spiezio launched a 3-run homer to make it 5-3. The Angels scored 3 more runs in the 8th. Darren Erstad homered to make it 5-4. Tim Salmon singled and Garrett Anderson singled, with Barry Bonds bobbling the ball, allowing pinch runner Chone Figgins to reach scoring position. Troy Gloss then doubled over Bonds' head, scoring 2 runs to give the Angels a 6-5 lead. San Francisco's offense managed 0 hits over the final 5 innings. Game 7 wasn't competitive. The Angels cruised to a 4-1 victory as the Giants' offense disappeared. Bonds, who had terrorized Angels pitching throughout the series, went 1 for 4 in Game 7 and couldn't deliver when it mattered most. Baker's decision to celebrate too early by giving Ortiz the game ball became symbolic of the entire collapse. 1982 Milwaukee Brewers. The Brewers took a 3-2 series lead back to St. Louis with their powerful offense poised to win the franchise's first championship. Milwaukee's Harvey's Wallbangers lineup had led baseball in runs scored during the regular season, featuring Robin Yount, Paul Molitor, Cecil Cooper, Gorman Thomas, and Ben Ogilvie. They scored just 1 run in Game 6, losing 13-1 in an absolute embarrassment. The Cardinals destroyed Milwaukee's pitching staff while the Brewers' offense completely vanished against Cardinals starter John Stupar. Game 7 was closer but equally devastating. Milwaukee held a 3-1 lead after 5 innings, with starter Pete Vukovich cruising. The Cardinals scored 5 runs in the 6th inning, and the Brewers never recovered. Milwaukee's offense, which had averaged over 5 runs per game during the regular season, managed 3 runs against Cardinals pitching. Yount and Molitor combined to go 3 for 14 in the final 2 games. The Brewers' bullpen, which had been unreliable all season, allowed multiple runs in both elimination games. Milwaukee had home field advantage for a potential Game 7, but couldn't force it. What other epic World Series collapses have tormented you over the years? Subscribe to watch more failures and heartache from all the sports we love.